Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen's meeting for December 6th, 2021 back to order. We started tonight's meeting in executive session where we discussed 3 items: to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or real value of a property if the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on negotiating position of the public body. We discussed with respect to collective bargaining for all town unions. Also, if an open session would have a detrimental effect on the town's bargaining position and the chair so declares. And then finally, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel and to conduct contract negotiations with non-union personnel. Decisions were made. They are all still under executive session, so nothing will be announced tonight. With that, would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we'll start with public comment and announcement. We'll start with the fire department.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I come before you tonight to again say thank you to this town. Actually, before I start, Lieutenant Brad Willis from the fire department. For the 7th year in a row, Harwich Fire and Police represented this town in the annual Homeless for the Holidays project that has been going on. Actually, this was the 20th year since it started and born in the year 2002, I guess. Over those years, many thousands of dollars at various different locations have been donated for various different causes. 7 years ago, I came here asking for the town's support, and I received it. And since that time, we've had nothing but generous donations from people throughout the region here, with the majority of our accepted donations going to the family pantry. This year, we had a total of 732 toys, approximately 1,000 pounds of food, and a little over $10,000 in cash, checks, and gift cards donated. This brings the 7-year total of toys donated to over 7,100 toys, approximately 12,000 pounds of food, and just over $50,000 in cash, checks, and gift cards, all donated for the most part to the family pantry and also to the Toys for Tots program, which helps kids throughout the Cape. So I just wanted to give everybody a final summation on how we did this year. Again, thank you to the community for coming out in strength and support to donate to these families in need. And lastly, I'd like to just thank Chief Clark, who gave us the initial go-ahead to have this program done through the fire department, and at this time, of course, Chief LeBlanc, who continues to support us in our endeavors. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I get a round of applause?
So just real quick, I'd like to add that, this is truly a group effort and everybody pitches in, but this wouldn't be possible without his coordination, his effort, and his organization of the whole event. So Brad's truly to be commended. He found out really quick what it was like to try and organize and herd cats, which is what we're like when we try to get us functioning. But he's done a great job, so he deserves the lion's share of the credit for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comments from the board, Larry?
No, thank you very much.
Julie?
I have no words. It's amazing. Thank you.
Mary?
Having been at the pantry, I know how much they appreciate it, so thank you so much. And I was sorry I didn't get there this weekend. You guys moved too fast for me.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Brad. All right, Cindy's hovering.
Thank you. Good evening. Cindy Williams, Executive Director of the Harwich Chamber. First, want to thank everyone that came out for the Christmas in Harwich this weekend, starting Friday night with the stroll, the tree lighting, and wonderful group of elementary school children that sang and entertained everyone. So that was a wonderful thing, as well as many other events that we did. Also starting, and I put this in front of you, this will be my last handout for the year, I promise. But
December.
But this is the Festival of Trees. This is the 5th year, and just like the fire department and police and Homeless for the Holidays, this all benefits the family pantry as well. There are 33 trees at the chamber as well as throughout town, and right now we're at just over 6,000, and it's just the first weekend that we've raised. And last year we raised just shy of 10,000, so I think we'll definitely surpass that. But again, this all benefits the family pantry, so please come out and bid on the trees. We have some wonderful donations and creative trees as well, so thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Moving on to the consent agenda.
Okay, I move that we vote to approve the consent agenda, which has several items. First, to approve the Assistant Town Administrator's recommendation to grant permission of Verizon New England, Inc. and N-Star Electric Company, DBA Eversource Energy, for the purpose to relocate one jointly owned pole, number 4 over 167, 20 feet southeast on Church Street, for the necessity to facilitate construction of a new subdivision road, Caldwell Lane. Second, to approve a Caleb Chase request in the amount of $1,000. To approve a Caleb Chase request in the amount of $1,000, and to approve a third Caleb Chase request in the amount of $1,000. To vote to approve the resignation of Alan Peterson from the Planning Board. Vote to approve the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission 2022 Seasonal Population Increase Estimation Form. And last, vote to accept a gift to the Harwich Police of 3 Harley-Davidson motorcycles.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Joe?
Just under the seasonal estimation, staff's recommending that our number go from 30,500 to 35,000. We believe the activity we've seen over the years justifies that, but wanted to make the board aware of that number.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Just to thank Alan Peterson for doing such a great job on the planning board for actually a long number of years, so.
Yeah, that was one of mine, too. That was a lot of years, and I will certainly miss him at town meeting calling the question.
Yeah.
And then a thank you, and I would butcher the last name, but Petkoskos for the motorcycle donation for the police department. That was a very generous donation of 3 Harley-Davidsons to the police department. So, Chief, if you could extend our thanks, that would be great. And population increase was another note, but Joe just covered that. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. Go ahead. What are we on
We've
there?
got annual.
Annual committee meetings, Harwich Housing Authority. Anyone here from the Harwich Housing Authority? We have a written report in the packet. The packet's available to the general public. Any questions from the board they want relayed, or are we good?
Nope, that was a
Larry?
good report.
I'm good. That was a good report.
Julie? Good?
No, I don't, yep.
Traffic Safety Committee. Come on up, if you would. We have your report. Is there anything you would like, first state your name for the record.
Linda Sabula, Traffic Safety Committee. Nothing that I'd like to add. We did give the report. Any questions?
Great report. And then Mary, questions?
No, I had no questions. Very thorough. Thanks, Linda.
Larry?
No, I appreciated the discussion of ongoing projects and the work that still needs to be done, and that you're keeping track of it. Sight lines particularly is a concern all through town. So
Yes.
I appreciate your efforts on that.
Great. Well, we have so many, all of us comment on, you can't see around the bushes, you can't see here, you can't see there. And we'd like to put together, review the bylaws, and see if we can pull together all of them in one place, and see if we can start getting the town to accept that they really do have to cut their bushes back. I mean, an incredible amount of money work was done at Snow and Road. Many thanks for accepting that donation from the resort. And it has made a big difference, but there's still more work to be done around the town. That's something we'd like to focus on in the coming year.
If I may, Michael, Second follow-up, is your recommendation to move monthly to quarterly meetings? You want to just expand on that? It
Well,
makes sense to me, but
At a prior Board of Selectmen meeting, you had one of the utilities in here going through an explanation of why it takes so long to get anything accomplished. And so much of what we do deals with utilities. We're now going on 2 years to try to get the wires moved on a telephone pole that's at Miles Pleasant South. We did get a new pole in, but it's now been over a year, and the wires still aren't moved. So that's really why quarterly, it takes so long to get anything accomplished.
Mary's making a note.
Let me see, I'll talk to you, maybe I can help.
Oh, please. We got one set of wires, but there's 2 more sets, and if they went through a discussion that said, it's on this list, but this utility has this list, and this utility has this list, and nobody seems to kind of get it all together. So that's why, just quarterly, if that was acceptable.
do we have to take an action on that at some later time, or?
Thank you, Linda. I would say yes. I'd have to read the charge as to what the charge was voted, but I would,
Charge is monthly.
yeah, so I would assume
There'll
we'd
be
have
another agenda
to
item.
agenda that,
Yeah.
Linda, and
If you would let us know when that is going to be on the agenda, that would be good.
she was looking at you, Joe.
Sorry, yes, I knew that. Hello again.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Bikeways Committee.
Good evening, all. Paul Gazai from the Bikeways Committee.
Good evening.
I submitted my annual report, and I don't have any additions to it. If you'd like, I can go through it. I'll leave that totally up to you.
No need to go through it. If you have nothing to add, we'll just go to questions and
No,
comments
any
from the
questions
board,
at
and we'll
all?
start with Mary.
Did I note that you have 2 openings?
No,
No? Oh,
no, we have a full boat of people.
oh, sorry, that was Linda.
We have 7, total
So
7.
you're all set? No, I had no questions. I thought it was a great report. Thank you. And thank you for keeping an eye on those things.
Julie?
No, thank you for your report, and I think the Bikeways Committee does quite a bit of work that we're not always all aware of. And recently I had a conversation with Bikeways and Traffic, and it was
Yep.
really helpful, because they're really
Charlie.
2 different, with Charlie Walkley, right?
Excellent.
So thank you for your report, and I have no other questions, but thanks for your
Thank you.
volunteering.
Larry?
Yeah, thanks for the report. My question is, would it make sense to have appoint the chief here, not a policeman on your committee, but a liaison, so there's someone that you can call with your safety questions?
Well, we do, on occasion, if we need someone, we do coordinate with the safety
Yeah,
committee.
that I realize. I was just wondering whether it might be good to have a particular person that would be a liaison. Chief, I guess I'll point that to you, but. Because safety is such a big
There's no question,
concern.
it does involve safety, and that's kind of our main purpose.
Okay.
Great report. Go ahead, Julie.
I just to respond to that, it's a good
Yeah.
question, Larry, but when I spoke with Bikeways and Traffic,
Charlie.
Linda and Charlie, they do have a good relationship, and so obviously through Traffic, they've got the police on, so, I mean, rather than duplicate efforts, they seem to work very well together in reporting different issues.
Okay. Thank you. Good report.
Thanks.
Great report. And just to note, Julie's recommendation back after meeting with both was not to merge the committees. So I'll put that on for a full board vote. But based on Selectman Anderson's comments, Julie's comments, and now where I am, we won't be voting to merge that committee.
Good.
So,
Thank you.
all right. But we will do that officially.
Excellent.
Thank you. Board of Appeals has canceled for tonight. Or is Board of Appeals here tonight?
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay, we didn't get the report, and staff
Well-
told me you wouldn't be here.
It's
Good
hard
evening.
to
Good
tell
evening.
with the masked up.
Dave Ryer, did you get the report in the package?
We did not get the report in the packet.
Okay, it should have been.
So I'm gonna let you go through the report.
Okay. I'm happy to report that we have, the big news is we now have 3 alternate members, and they're younger guys that are working in the community, which is great, to add some balance to all those old, retired, worn-out guys that have been on the committee forever. They're all sworn in, everybody's up to date on their ethics training. We post our agendas and minutes monthly. We held the meetings from January through April remotely using Zoom, and for the most part, it worked okay. From May through November, we've been meeting back in Town Hall, except for October, when we had the power outage, we were shut. This year, we handled a total of 57 matters. Last year, we only did 41, so it's almost a 50% increase. I think that's partly because of the COVID. Both things were restrained, I think, as far as people building, plus there's just been a tremendous turnover of real estate, and a lot of people want to make improvements to the property as soon as they acquire it here. And most of the lots south of 28 are all non-conforming, so they have to come to the board for relief to do whatever it is they want to do. That's it.
Questions from the board? Larry?
None. Thank you, David.
Julie?
I don't have any questions, thank
Mary?
you.
Me neither. Nice to see you, David.
Unfortunately, Don Howell isn't here. He asked me about 40B training most years. This past year, there really haven't been any courses offered with the COVID. And one of the issues, I couldn't answer this last year because I didn't remember what the course or two was that came around, but most of them really are not designed for the Board of Appeals members. They deal more with the community aspects of it. Do we need affordable housing? Where do we need it? What should we do? And those matters really aren't properly before the Board of Appeals. What I would like to do is get a special training, maybe from our outside counsel, but it's obviously we're gonna have to pay them, on the market rate, what would be our special considerations of a market rate 40B, like the one that was proposed down here at Chloe's Path. I've been on the board long enough, so we've had 5 or 6 40Bs, but they've all been nonprofit. Those are pretty straightforward, but the market rates are a lot more, what's the word, I don't want to say cumbersome, but involved. There's been a lot of press. There was one up in, I think, Truro maybe. There's been one in Hyannis. There's been one possibly in Eastham, and several of them went to litigation. So I think that would be helpful for this board. And I'd have to talk to outside counsel and see, you know, I'm not talking an all-day session, but just to give us some guidance that when we face one of these, which we're going to eventually, what do we really need as a board to be looking at specially? So I'd just
Thank
like to
you.
get your thoughts on whether that's a worthwhile expenditure or not.
I think we can anticipate that that project will come forward and will come to you. And
Well,
you-
if not that, another one.
Right, and Joe, would you comment on that? Getting the training?
I was reading a memo for further in the packet and wasn't really dialed into that conversation, to be completely blunt about that. But with regard to training specifically, we're working on it through administration. We're working with Maya, the clerk's office, KP Law, and others to make sure we have a suite of training exercises and training topics. One of the things we're trying to roll out for both new employees and new committee members is sort of an orientation that revolves around training. So I hope that captures some of what David was talking
Well,
about.
this will be specific to 40B projects, like Chloe's Path, so I think this would be a little bit more specific training related to 40B. And I know, David, that we're allowed as a town to hire a housing consultant to work with the Board of Appeals through that process.
Right, but I'd like to get some guidance for the board from our outside counsel as to how we do it, you know, what should we be looking at? Traffic, obvious, that's an obvious one, because we've looked at that with respect to the nonprofits. But, you know, there's the one up in Truro or Wellfleet, I forget, went forever on wastewater, and they hired all kinds of consultants. That process, I think, went well over a year before they finally approved the project.
Go ahead, Joe.
So KP Law does provide, as part of our contract, standard topics that are already included that they train to. 40B is one of those topics.
Can we try and arrange with David, for some training for the Board of Appeals on that?
Absolutely,
We'd
and
like
I
to have
believe
it
Amy
ahead
Questle
of
is the
time.
lead on that.
So should I send the request to Joe?
He's got the request.
Okay.
And I think he'll have staff reach out to you with maybe some dates.
Great, thanks. I think that will be really helpful to the board. None of us have been through a market rate, but especially with the three new alternates. And because the process goes on so long, I try to make sure our regular members sit on that kind of a project, but with the thing dragged out, we have to substitute in sometimes the alternate, so they need to be up to speed also.
Thank you.
So,
Can I just ask, David, you made a reference to outside counsel. Did you mean KP Law?
Our council, right?
our
Right.
town council.
Thank you, yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My guess is we may want to sit on that too.
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Well, that is one of the things we were talking about among staff, that KP has already reached out to us to try and coordinate that. You know, what we're trying to do is identify some of the open meeting law trainings that are good after the election, and when committees are getting reappointed, something like 40B could help, say like in the January, February timeframe.
Okay, next up is discussion and possible vote to appoint Assistant Town Administrator Megan Eldridge as the ADA Compliance Officer for the Harwich Accessibility Rights Committee. The last time we discussed Harwich Accessibility Rights, there was a desire to really get this committee up and running again. Staff and I had a conversation. Ellen in the office really ran with this. She's got some suggestions on changing the charge to make it a little more inviting for people to want to be on that committee. And lessening some of the criteria so that we can fill that committee. Ellen and Megan spoke, and I think Megan, Joe, I'll let you talk about this. I don't know where it went from Ellen and Megan's speaking other than this agenda, which
Well,
I
I
think
was-
is a great idea.
Yeah, I was directed to say that it's my recommendation, but to be very clear and honest about it, Megan wholeheartedly offered when she heard about the situation. Where first we need an ADA compliance officer, somebody from the town, typically an employee. Anyone that knows Megan knows that she lives it every day. She's a tremendous advocate, and there couldn't be a better choice for Megan to be the compliance officer. And I think that appointment and the board endorsing that recommendation tonight will go even further to supporting the Rights Committee itself. And Ellen has raised a number of great questions regarding the charge and whether there could be some tweaks to the language, because I think there was some misinterpretation of some of the requirements over the years. Having an ADA compliance officer, though, is the best first step.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Can I get a motion?
I move that we appoint Megan Eldridge as compliance officer for the Harwich Accessibility Rights Committee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I really applaud, because I've been pushing this for a long time to get a compliance officer, so I really applaud Megan stepping up. And Alan and I talked about the charge as well. She has some great ideas. My only caution is that some of that charge comes directly from the statute.
Right.
And so we need to be, I'm not sure how much flexibility we have with the percent of disabled people on the committee itself, those types of, that's a little harsh. So just caution that we pay attention to the statute itself.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Go
may, point's very well taken from Selectman Ballantyne. The ADA compliance officer, once that position is appointed, we have to notify the state, and they become the primary point of contact. So Megan would be the person validating with the state that we're going in the right direction, or if we have to update the charge, or if we should expand the charge as well. So you're right to bring that up. This appointment helps make sure we're in compliance with that.
And my second is, I'll continue my plea, we need volunteers for that committee.
We have 2 vacancies right now. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
4-0.
Thank you.
All right, discussion and possible vote to approve a remote participation request for a member of the planning board. So we have a request from the planning board. Joe, my question on this, it says a member of the planning board, and if I read John Chory's email correctly, it said 3 members of the planning board.
So that's the request that came in today. What you'll see in the packet is, we do have a request from the town planner for planning board member David Harris. I will admit, this is the memo that I was going through when David was speaking earlier, because I did want to validate that it meets your requirements, and I believe it does. The request that you're coming next week, or that you're expected to take up next week, does involve 3 members of a committee. But tonight, it's 1 member, it's David Harris, and he's on the planning board.
And I believe David Harris has gotten the same, had the same request for the past 2 or 3 years, and we've granted it. So, can I get a motion on this?
I move that we vote to approve a remote participation request for David Harris.
Yes.
Second.
On the planning, for the planning.
For the planning board.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Joe, just a comment on next week so we can discuss it in the morning. 3 members of a committee is a lot.
It also violates the policy, and there's also concerns with that particular committee that beyond the town's policy, it may violate the statute.
Okay.
So we do have to discuss
We
that
have some
further.
homework to do before that's on next week.
Correct.
Thank you.
Do you want me to go with a motion going forward?
Sure, D.
I move that we vote to send a letter of recommendation for Mid-Cape Church Homes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
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 I move that we vote to affirm the town administrator's appointment of Robert Picciarelli as building commissioner per the Town of Harwich Charter, Chapter 4, Section 4, Clause 4-4-1.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Anticipated start time?
We believe that Rob will be able to join us probably the first week in January. Could have been the end of the month, but we're going to give him
Christmas, yeah.
credit for the holidays, have him start after January 1st.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
4-0.
Thank you.
I move that we vote to approve the high-definition cable channel designation.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'm just hoping that Jamie doesn't feel the need to go through this in detail.
It was the longest part of our packet. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move that we vote to approve 2022 annual off-premise wine and malt liquor licenses for Bourne Petroleum Limited, DBA Harwich Exxon, 173 Pleasant Lake Avenue, Malik Corporation, DBA Value Mart, 435 Route 28, and Pizza Shark Partners, DBA Pizza Shark, 403 Pleasant Lake Ave.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0.
I move that we vote to approve 2022 annual off-premise all alcohol liquor licenses for ATJX Inc., DBA Moonshine Liquors, 4 Great Western Road, Cranberry Liquors at Harwich Port LLC, DBA Cranberry Liquors, 555 Route 28, Main Street Quick Pick Inc., DBA Main Street Market, 715 Main Street, Portside Liquors 3 Inc., DBA Portside Liquors, 1421 Route 39, and A.J. Lukes of Harwich Inc., 224 Route 28.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
None.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0.
I move that we vote to approve 2022 annual on-premise wine and malt liquor licenses for Cape Roots Market and Cafe LLC, DBA Cape Roots Market and Cafe, 557 Route 28, Ember Pizza Inc., DBA Ember, 600 Route 28, First Crush Winery Cape Cod LLC, DBA First Crush Winery, 527 Main Street, wine only, Spiridon and Aglaya Christakis, DBA George's Pizza House, 564 Route 28.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0.
I move that we vote to approve 2022 annual on-premise all alcohol liquor licenses Allen Harbor Yacht Club, Inc., 371 Lower County Road. Ashwood Food Service, Inc., DBA Jake Rooney's, 119 Brooks Road. Beachlight LLC, DBA Seal Pub, 703 Main Street. BLM Restaurant Group, Inc., DBA Lanyard Bar and Grill, 429 Route 28. Blue Stripe LLC, DBA Cape Sea Grill, 31 C Street. Brack's Restaurant Management, Inc., DBA Brack's Landing, 705 Main Street. 400 East, Inc., 1421 Orleans Road. Harwich Inn and Tavern LLC, DBA Harwich Inn and Tavern, 77 Route 28. Harwich Port House of Pizza, Inc., 330 Route 28. Harwich Port Seafair, Inc., DBA Harwich Port Seafarer, 86 Sisson Road. Hot Stove, Inc., DBA Hot Stove Saloon, 551 Route 28, pending receipt of certificate of insurance. Morningstar Restaurant, Inc., DBA Villa Roma, 278 Route 28. Shogun, Inc., DBA Noble House, 21 Route 28. Shooting Star Realty LLC, DBA Buca's Restaurant, 4 Depot Road. WFS Restaurant Group, Inc., DBA Alouette, 787 Route 28. And last but not least, Zach, Inc., DBA Castaways, 986 Main Street.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Michael, I just have, bring up the memo we got from Chief Gilmet. I presume that the licenses go forward, and those are actions that we have to monitor as we, in the future. Joe, do you wish to comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, I can speak to it if you want to have Chief speak to it. And if we're talking about the memorandum dated October 29th.
Yeah, just procedurally. I think we need to go ahead and approve the licenses, and then this comes up later.
Right, and these, what's identified in the memorandum are potential licenses, and if I remember violations. And if I remember correctly, the hearings have been held, and the board will be set to take action, I think, next week, December 14th.
Okay.
I believe that's the case for these items. Or in one of the cases, you may have already done it.
That's all. I just want to be sure the procedure was correct.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, 4-0. Old business, discussion and possible vote to accept the withdrawal notice of the sole bidder and cancel the request for proposal for 5 Bells Neck. As you are all aware, we discussed this. There was one respondent to the RFP. I'm going to find the page. There's been several conversations about this. Give me a second to find the note. At least it's not a 300-page packet, it's only 132. So. Here we go, 9 more pages.
Is it 119?
119,
Yep.
yes. So the 501c3 Historic West Harwich Schoolhouse submitted an RFP. They sent us a letter on November 16th. I will only read the bottom paragraph. The Board of Directors of the Historic West Harwich Schoolhouse LLC met, and after serious consideration, the board voted to no longer pursue this RFP. We appreciate the time and effort of everyone in trying to get this accomplished. I don't believe that we need a vote to not go forward with this RFP. Joe, do you think we need a vote of the board for that?
Well, I would say, and I believe what you have in the packet is the letter from the sole bidder, my memorandum that goes back to one of the earlier discussions that the chairman mentioned on the results of the bid and the bid itself. Within the bid documents and within my memorandum, it was documented many times that the town reserves the right to cancel any and all bids and reject the process in total. So it would be a belt and suspenders approach, but I'd say there's no harm if the board voted to do that for the purposes of taking future actions.
Thank you. So I'll just open up comments from the board. Welcome, Don.
Hello.
Greetings from
Imagine
Boston.
you spent a lot of time in traffic.
Greetings from Boston.
Yeah. So we're on to West Harwich, Don, the first of the two, which is the discussion and possible vote to accept the withdrawal notice. And I'm gonna open this up for comments and questions from the board. Larry?
Yeah, my computer keeps coming and going on me. I don't know what the issue is, but I do, in reading the letter, I do have a concern that, we have the letter, so we'll have to vote on that. But my concern respectfully is that the implication of the statements made in there that one of the reasons they withdrew it was they were told that the priority was being given to Brooks Academy and to the fire station, of the house. And in the past, when we've supported a CPC article, if that's the route they take, it's come to a full board. It hasn't been come at with a single statement like that. And I don't think this came up for a discussion whether we were looking to support selling that one property to the firehouse. Now, we may very well do that, but I don't think we've come up with a discussion on it. And I will note that, at least as far as I can tell, reading the CPC's website, they've not asked for CPC funding at the moment. They may, and I think the timeline's gone. So I'm a little, that bothers me somewhat. I do think that the major discussion will be next time is where we go next. But I just wanted to point out my discomfort in that part of the letter, if it's true. I don't think was run process-wise as we'd like it to.
Well, I'll dive into that, and I see Duncan Barry's in the audience tonight, and I would certainly invite Duncan up since he participated in the meeting if he wants to come up. My recollection of those comments were in an open meeting in front of this entire board, with Joe telling us what was advantageous and what wasn't, and board discussion on competing. When the initial RFP was sent, that was done in this room. And because the reference to a single meeting keeps being brought up, and I think, in the day that we live now, you can write anything you want on social media, and at least half the people believe it without fact-checking the other side of it. Duncan was in the meeting that keeps being talked about, mostly by, which I'm a little upset that Sally Urbano, who's the president of this group, went on social media and posted, and a lot of these accusations came from her post, but she attended the same meeting Duncan Barry attended, I attended, Joe Powers attended.
Yeah, if I may, Michael,
You may not, let me finish. We voted, and we didn't take an actual vote, but the conversation happened in this meeting. And the conversation happened based on Joe's memo. The town reserves the explicit right to select a proposal which does not necessarily contain the highest price and/or economic benefit to the town. The Board of Selectmen reserves the right to reject any and all proposals or to cancel this RFP. And, as part of the evaluating process, the town reserves the right to conduct interviews with the proposers at either the initial evaluation or final state of the evaluation process in order to assure a full understanding of the proposals. That, again, was an open meeting, and that open meeting, the respondents to the RFP agreed to have a meeting and for them to pick the date, at which time they did pick the date. At that meeting, the Board of Selectmen unanimously asked me to be in that meeting. Nobody had a problem with it. So nothing happened outside of a public meeting, and the allegations and even the comments that something happened, it's disgusting to me. Because this person that made this attack on social media based on that post is the chair of our Charter Review Committee and the author of, or the editor of the Harwich Old Timers. And had somebody not read the footnotes and watched the entire meeting, they would know that it was endorsed by the Board of Selectmen and that I was in that meeting as a representative of the entire board. But again, you can write anything you want on social media and half the people will believe it. Now you may, Larry.
Thank you. You're ahead of me, because I did not read any social media comments on this.
Well, I was referring to your comment about the meeting that Sally referenced.
I'm referencing Sally's letter that we have in our packet, that that we're told that the first priorities were, as I mentioned, Brooks Academy and the fire station, the old fire station on Sisson Road. And my point was that I'm not arguing with anything you said. You know, you attended that, you were appointed to do it, to negotiate. My only concern is, to the extent that if this letter is correct, that they were told there was no hope of getting support because they were a low priority. We voted in the past on what we supported or not. That's my single point.
But that conversation happened with this board, Larry. That conversation may have re-happened in the meeting. I don't have a recollection of it, actually. The conversation that Sally's referring to was in front of this entire board, not in a private meeting.
On the priorities.
That's correct. This board and the town administrator brought that up in the advantageous, not advantageous.
I don't recall that,
I'll turn to
that
Joe.
part of it.
Again, you have it in your packet, but the board had a discussion on September 27th of this year, wherein I went through, in fact, it was old business item B, discussion and possible vote on the results of the West Harwich Schoolhouse request for proposal. And I went through the criteria that's in the bid documents. On the first page of that memo, under number 4, it says financial capacity. My determination was not advantageous, and I wrote, the proposer does not demonstrate sufficient funding available to preserve, restore, and rehabilitate the premises. Additionally, criterion 6 of the 7 indicates that CPA funds are a potential funding source, which in my opinion contradicts their statement under impact analysis. See criterion number 3. I believe this to be the case, as we are fully aware that there is considerable competition from both town-endorsed projects and private entities, such as this group, for the finite funds available for historic preservation. The town and proposer may be at cross purposes in the future for historic preservation funds. I believe the board had a further discussion on that night, but that I was also informed as the writer of that from comments that were made at public meetings such as community preservation and in conversations with the Brooks Academy Museum Commission. So it was not, from my recollection, the negotiating meeting that's allowed under the RFP that occurred with the sole bidder. The comments, as the chair have said, were made at the public meeting in September. And I also take it that their statement was that the town counter offered with a request of $35,000 upfront sales money and a caution that CPC money would be limited. I don't recall that the town would have said would, but rather said could, and consistent with the memo I've written. So I do believe that, to previous statements, that discussion first came about in a public meeting of the Board of Selectmen in this room.
Mary?
My recollection of that is that we talked about the limited amount of money for historic preservation, and that we had already committed some amount to Brooks Academy and knew more was coming at us. If there was any discussion of the fire station, there certainly at that point was no commitment, so that might have just been thrown out as, but it certainly wasn't that we were saying we were rejecting the schoolhouse because of that. It was just a look at, we've already committed this to Brooks, the firehouse is out there floating around, there could be a problem with having enough money. That's my recollection of that conversation.
Thank you.
And that was in that public meeting, because it's the only one I went to.
Right. Julie was next, and then Don.
Yeah, and if I recall, any discussion on that just came from even past the history of how long this has been kicking around. And again, you know, it's a historic building, it'd be great to be able to restore it, but they did go to CPC before, I don't know how many years ago that was. Yeah. And then we were talking about the dollar and the whole idea of what are we gonna do? So we have town meeting, we have this property, we have a group that's worked hard at trying to figure out what's next, but we continue to I feel like the can just keeps getting kicked down the road. So my recollection of that meeting was, we really need to look at this and take action, and figure out what we were gonna do beyond $1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree, that was my recollection. I went back and looked. We absolutely knew you were going to be in the meeting. The thing that's all missing here, and I don't want to get into he said, she said, you can't get grants unless you have a commitment somehow, a license agreement, which I helped facilitate with Judy Ford back in the day, or a lease, because you have no ownership rights if you don't have something. You can't get a grant as a third party for something. What I'm concerned about here is we did not take a vote that we were either going to reject it or what our counter would be. We had no vote on anything like that. We said, sit on a meeting, figure out what it is they're intending to do beyond the four corners of the bid, and see where we're at. I mean, I'm still, I've been following this building since 1996, and that's not all that old compared to when it was stopped being used as a school building. I'd love to find somebody that cares about it. I don't know why we would have gone through a DCPC and tried to protect a whole area when one of the linchpins to it, which is outside of the area, is going to go away. I mean, I don't see how that benefits the town. And there's an inextricable history between that and the Baptist church. If there's a flaw in this, that's fine. But I'm not concerned about who said what, about who was where, and who said what in a meeting. I'm looking at the goal line here, and that was the building. Do we want to see this building torn down, or do we want to see something come of it, like the South Harwich Meeting House? And that really is a central point to me. We have no position. We never voted to reject. We never voted to accept. We never voted anything other than go to a meeting and fess out what's going on with this thing.
I go back to my original statement about the $1 bid, and again, Duncan Berry, who's done a lot of the work out in West Harwich, is in the audience. I don't think it's responsible for the town of Harwich to sell a property assessed at roughly $280,000 for $1, and I think I've been pretty straightforward about that from the beginning. I think when we left the meeting that we had with Joe and talked about the RFP, there was a fairly strong consensus that we were going to move forward and that they were going to put some more money up. I think that they had in the room got another pledge for money, and I thought we were moving forward. About a week later, I received a call from Lou Urbano, and it said that Sally Urbano was stepping down from the 501c3 and that the 501c3 was being dissolved. I had subsequent conversations again with Sally Urbano and Lou Urbano and Duncan Berry. But my thought, and I believe everybody else's thought when they walked out of the room, was, wow, we're moving forward. And again, I would get too much more into the weeds on the social media posts, but whether we call it hypocritical or whatever we call it about fiduciary responsibility, town meeting gave us direction to sell the building. They never said to give it away. And there is a whole nother part of this town that owns that property and would like to see something happen with that property, but they did not authorize to give that building away for $1 for anything, for historic preservation or anything. I have no problem with maintaining or putting an RFP out as a real estate deal, which this is. No matter what, it's a real estate deal because we're disposing of town property. The town has not voted to restore the old schoolhouse. Now, the outside facade of that building, I have absolutely no problem with the historic restriction on the outside of that building, which is, I think, where we all agree that there should be a historic preservation to the outside of the building. What happens to the inside of the building, whoever buys it, I think, can do what they want with it. We used it as a haunted house, and it was full of video games. I mean, I played there 35 years ago. Played street hockey there and attended all the haunted houses and Friday night youth center nights. So it's been used for many, many things other than a schoolhouse. But if I'm reading correctly everything everyone said, they care about the outside portion of that building and that they would like to have the opportunity to purchase the building and do what some of the ideas in the RFP was. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious because this has been floating around, but it hasn't been here. What were they told when they did the walkthrough? Because I was hearing that they were told they couldn't do a museum. And it started limiting what their ability was to do stuff. And that had to do with the Department of Public Works as they were escorting through the building.
Joe came into this in the 24th hour. Maybe Duncan would be better to answer that. Joe, is that fair?
Sure,
doing?
I do have a response, though.
Honestly, I'm in the dark about the social media, and I don't recall the details of that. But, I mean, I think there was kind of like a bias saying, well, you know, this has been tried before, but I don't think there was any formal hard line about anything
Well, the walkthrough.
during the walkthrough.
Joe?
So the walkthrough was convened by the DPW director and the facility maintenance manager, because I had tasked the DPW director with developing the bones of the RFP to assist Megan and I to move these processes going forward. When I heard from the bidder that claim, I validated it. I asked the DPW director, and he insisted that neither he nor the facilities manager made any comments relative to that use. Having said that, the RFP talks about any questions should also be submitted to the town to track them. So Link is saying he didn't say it, and the town did not receive the question. Furthermore, I can tell you as your procurement officer, that did not weigh in on the analysis of the bid.
Thank you. Don, does that answer?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what Duncan's take is on everything at the moment.
Provided that it's open to the public?
It is.
Okay. So my thought is that that meeting that we were at when we discussed the possibility of, you know, a closure or, you know, cash transaction, my thought is that I still have a very active party that's interested in acquiring that and the church. But they work in a different cycle. They work in a different budgetary cycle and a different grant cycle. And I remain interested as a neighbor. I'd love to personally provide whatever funds are needed to put a hold on the property, whether it's an escrow, however you want to do it. I mean, I'd personally do it just to make sure that, you know, if there is a transaction, they buy, I get out, you get your money, I don't have to make a penny. I don't care. But I would love to see just the opportunity for the decision to be made where you'd have this kind of, I don't know if you saw the post that I put up about this group, the American College of Building Arts. There was a whole PBS thing on them a while back, and it was a fascinating thing. This is a great opportunity. And they need a project to raise money. You guys want the money. Sounds like a reasonably good deal. It's just a matter of timing. So I know, strictly speaking, this is out of the parameter of the RFP. It's out of the parameter of a real estate deal, but that's kind of how I'd love to participate or help out in bridging a couple of concerns. And if it doesn't work, then you go on with another process. But I'm just offering that as a concerned citizen who will put my money where my mouth is and see if I can make a deal to the town's benefit and also to the neighborhood's benefit.
Thank you, Duncan.
So,
Larry?
Yeah, let me just restate in some ways, my original comment, because I don't disagree with an open meeting and all the things you've said, but to the extent that the implication in this letter, not the social media, which I'm going to go home and maybe read now, but, and maybe to Don's comment, if that were indeed made, that I don't want this process to stop without giving some chance for consideration. And I don't think it's our role to preclude that, even with Joe's review of the submittal. I think we all want to sell this as soon as we can. And I think that you go back and read the motion, we are to sell the property, we're to keep it historical if we can. As I read that, I think the if you look back at past town articles, the emphasis has always been on historical property. And none of us cares what happens inside, but we need to keep moving ahead. And so I'm concerned about, well, I'm repeating myself now, so I'll stop.
Thank you. Joe?
So everything that the board and the town has to talk about is Mass General Laws, Chapter 30B, because that's the procurement law first and foremost. It's the law under which I must, as your chief procurement officer, which is the title you grant me when you grant me the title of town administrator, per the charter, is to honor and work within Chapter 30B. The previous speaker, and I speak not to the selectmen, but the resident from the public, my understanding is not a part of the original bid. And so there's only one bid. The town has to come to a conclusion on the bid that the town received under the RFP that was issued earlier this year. All those other discussions are something that I can't speak to because there's only one bidder at present. And so I could say that if the board wanted to proceed as Selectman Ballantyne is saying, if others in the community have an interest, then it may be the appropriate step that the board do what you've contemplated under your agenda item tonight. And that is cancel the last RFP and/or reject the bid, and then you can take future steps, which is why the chairman has that second agenda item. But 30B does not allow me or you to have that secondary conversation about bringing other parties in, because other potential bidders who did not bid would have a legitimate claim to the Inspector General's office that the town greatly changed the process.
Julie?
So I think thank you for that segue, because that's exactly what I was gonna say. Is I think we're more in agreement than disagreement in a sense. I mean, we all have reiterated that we appreciate the historic nature of the building. We've expressed in the past that we would love to see it preserved. The case is where we are as the town, in terms of what action we can take. And again, this has been kicking around since I was on the board and many years before that, according to Dawn. So I think going back out with a new RFP, having a new charge, and letting more parties get involved, to Duncan's point of having an interested party, and I had seen some of that information, you know, why not? We have an asset. We are supposed to do what's right for the town with that asset. We have a lot of needs that some of that money could come in handy rather than $1. You know, if somebody puts in an offer through the RFP process, I don't have a problem either with saying, let's, keep the historic nature, the restriction for the exterior. But I don't really think that we can go beyond that. We need to see what else is out there, what, not necessarily the market will bring. It's not a typical property, but I think we need to look at it again, and it sounds like going back out with a new RFP is the best way to go forward for all parties, including the board.
Thank you, Julie. Mary?
I agree with what Julie said, and I'd like, before coming here tonight, I thought I'd like that RFP to have some language in it that preference may be given if rental housing is included and/or exterior historic preservation. So we're open. We've got both of those in there as preferences, but it's still pretty open. Is that doable?
So let's get rid of A first, which is going to be the vote to accept the withdrawal notice of the sole bidder and cancel the request for proposal for 5
Okay.
Bells.
I move that we vote to accept the withdrawal notice of the sole bidder and cancel the request for proposal for 5 Bells Neck Road.
Second.
Moved in second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
No.
Oh, opposed, sorry, Don.
Yeah.
Opposed, 4-1.
Yeah,
Joe.
just a comment, I've been arguing, but I thought for some time that if this is where we are, we need to get out of this one and look forward. I think the main discussion now is what we do next, because we've tried several RFPs, and we haven't had a successful bidder, quite frankly. So we'll try again.
I think putting an RFP, go ahead, Don.
I'd still like the intermediate step. I mean, we're at a point now, if it's going to be bothering us, and I know, speaking to 30B, there's been plenty of buildings across the state that have conveyed for $1 to charitables if there was a purpose involved with it. That's an exception. You have to demonstrate it, but it's an exception if, when you're evaluating. What I'm concerned about is we didn't do this, I'm not sure what we're going to do with the firehouse, and I know what we did with the South Harwich Meeting House, and we had a DCPC. There were a bunch, not just one or two, a bunch of town meeting votes. They bought windows for it. They approved putting the roof on it. Nobody in town would have done that if they were under the presumption that we're just going to dump it off and it's somebody else's problem. I mean, the conversation at town meeting, as well as in this room, has always revolved around trying to preserve it as part of a whole. We go... I disagree strongly with the preference. I mean, if we go and allow that building to either be flattened or altered significantly, shame on us.
Michael?
Joe wanted to say something?
Well, I just wanted to put it out there because I have not seen social media, nor do I tend to live there. But folks have asked me why I'm stuck on the price point that I am, and I need to make it abundantly clear. I'm not stuck on any price point. I'm not the decision maker. I'm the procurement officer, and so those dollar transactions do happen. But one of the things that the board needs to discuss, whether it's tonight under item B or at future meetings, is what is the perceived value of the property? And if the board wants to rely upon that perceived value of the property. Now, the town has to demonstrate a value. The 30B manual, in fact, I referenced in my memo, and I'm going to, if I could, Mr. Chairman, read it from the original RFP. The last criterion is item 6, sale price. The sale price offered for the premises will be considered in the evaluation of the proposals. Will be considered. That doesn't say that the sale price is the sole determiner, and it wouldn't be. There's 5 other criteria. But it goes on to say that proposals that include a sales price close to the fair market value of the land as determined by the Harwich Assessing Department will be considered highly advantageous. Take out the as determined by the Harwich Assessing Department, and that comes directly from the 30B manual that procurement officers go through on how to dispose of town assets. And the purpose of that is whatever we do in the RFP, the town must still be able to define the value. What it says in the 30B manual is that proposals should seek sale prices close to fair market value of the land, and towns can rely upon their assessor's property cards to determine that. And what that really means is that's the path of least resistance. If the town wants to derive a value of a property to dispose of, we can simply rely upon the facts that we already have. Or the town could seek an appraisal. And you'll recall that that's what we're doing on 203 Bank Street. We're not looking at the totality of the 4 lots. We're looking at the parcel that has the greatest use, which is the old fire station and the land that it sits upon. So because we're not relying upon the value derived from the property cards, we have to develop a value, and we do that through appraisal. So as you discuss this next RFP, bear that in mind, but for that last RFP, the town never said that it had to be $1, but the town did give fair notice that we derived the value as what the property card said for the land, not even just for the building.
Which is 142,000?
Correct, and that the town would rely upon that for the highly advantageous proposal. Now, that comes into play when you have more than one. It's a little bit different when you have one proposal, but there were a number of factors that were missing. So no matter what we do next as a town, we still have to be driven by 30B and all the appropriate requirements within that.
Thank you, Joe. Julie, you are next.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, and to your point, Larry, about moving forward, I think it's important because, fiscally responsible, trying to figure out what the market, value is on the property. But we also have an insurance issue. We have to pay, for insuring it, right. And so we're spending tax dollars on insuring something. We also have a property that needs patching of, a roof just to get that insurance. I mean, we're spending some money here, and we need to do what we can to get the town what it deserves for that building. And again, with the nature of restrictions in place and in the RFP, I think that's kind of the best way to go forward.
Thank you, Julie.
Just my name?
Please.
Yeah, Karen Horn from West Harwich. I don't know anything about all of the legalities and all of these 30Bs. I'm just going to address something that Mr. Howell said a moment ago. Is it Howell? Yes. He said, we want to find someone who cares about this building. You have a group who cares about this building. They're offering to purchase it. They're offering to rehabilitate it, to take it off your hands. This RFP has happened. I've been living here nearly 20 years. I could walk from here to you to the building. You have a group who cares about this building. Yes, it has a market value, but it's been sitting there. I have watched it deteriorate over these 20 years. I don't understand why you need more money. You've never had anybody who wants to purchase this property. You have a group who's passionate about this building, who wants this building, who wants to improve this building, and I'm just very confused and quite frankly a little disappointed in the whole process. I know Duncan, he knows all the history and the legalities of the whole process, but I, as a neighbor who lives and drives by and walks by that building every single day, I am completely baffled. To address your question, we care about this building. We want to buy this building. And now you think you need more money. You've never had anybody who wanted to buy this building. And you're turning down the offer to purchase this building, and I do not understand it.
Thank you. Mary?
Do I recall you saying it must have been one of the other meetings this was on the agenda, that if we did put it out again, it should go out through MLS, that this did not have widespread publicity. So we don't know who's out there that might have a proposal for this.
Yeah, that is correct. I think that the procurement process on disposal of town property is very skewed. Where it gets advertised, how it gets advertised. This is a real estate transaction, and it really is. And perceived value, I think we'll go to Duncan, but in our conversation, I don't believe Duncan had a problem with the price that we were talking about. $1, just to the previous speaker, that's not for everybody in town. And as much as we talk about this building, and as much as we have talked about this building, we've never listed this as a piece of real estate. And if groups came up all over town and wanted to take over our properties, and the Board of Selectmen, taking direction from town meeting, which was to sell the property, sold them all for $1, I'm not sure that they would vote for us to dispose of any more of their properties. I certainly wouldn't as a resident. If we sold this and voted to sell this as $1, I would never vote again to sell another piece of land in this town. Duncan?
Yeah, so I just wanted to also just color the conversation with the following consideration, and that is that the town has already put in hundreds, if not thousands, of person hours into the creation of a district. So when I think of my 2020, one of my memories is Zoom screens with like 30 people on it from Cape Cod Commission. Each one of those meetings is like 2 hours long times 60 people. That's like a couple hundred person hours per meeting. There were dozens of these meetings, and they're still going on with the design guidelines and going through the county, and it's like we really have a lot of stuff invested in that. It just seems so ironic, or I don't know if ironic, paradoxical, that the one property that is abuts that district is the property of the town, and the consideration is that it wouldn't be in the town's interest to keep in keep in line with what the town's already made a massive human resource investment in, which is creating this district. So I just think that ought to be part of the consideration, obviously. But again, I do like the fact that the process is so open and that we're having this discussion. And again, I want to be up there however I can to help out, because I do think there's a great future for the building and for that little corner, and turning the town, that little part of the village, back into a vibrant center that it always had been up until the 1970s.
Thank you, Tom. Joe?
I don't mean to belabor this, but I need to make it abundantly clear that there's only really two people in this town that are burdened by 30B, and that's me and the Assistant Town Administrator, because we've been identified, I've been identified as your Chief Procurement Officer. And I appreciate the previous speakers, certainly the immediate one, talking about the openness of the process. But part of that openness is that we're having a conversation between the board, the owner of the property, and representatives of a bidder telling you how to build the bid. I understood my direction from the board under 30B to operate under the constraints of the law, which I must do, and that's why I can't accept $1. And the process that created this bid was legal. If the board or anyone else in town and any agents want to talk about that building, then you ought not to talk about it under 30B. Let me leave the room and figure out your different options. But if the town is going to dispose of surplus property, we must obey Chapter 30B. And it shouldn't be an open discussion on the parameters and the criterion with potential bidders. That's very problematic.
Thank you, Joe.
For me.
Thank you.
I'm not a potential bidder. I'm not part of the group that put the bid in or anything
If
like
I
that.
may, Mr. Chairman.
Let's just end it. Duncan, in some ways, you could be considered a
There was a person in the
representative of,
negotiating
so
room
let's
is
just,
my-
let's
is
kill
my
the gray
feeling.
area. What's the pleasure of the board? Personally, I support a real estate transaction with a historical restriction on the facade of the building, and then it's open for anyone to bid on. And I, for one, would think an appropriate value would be the value of the dirt, which is $140,000. That's where I stand. Mary?
I'm with you on that. I think a new request for proposals should go out. I agree. Let's talk about historical preservation of the exterior. And I don't know if anyone else is in with me, but some preference may be given to rental units. If others don't feel that way, I'm okay not putting that in.
Julie?
I would agree. I don't, I think that's the best way forward, and I definitely think a restriction, on the historical facade is helpful, I think, to any group that's interested, so.
Larry?
Yes, I think the first decision that we've made over time is we want to maintain the historical building. It's been through several town meetings, and the RFPs haven't been successful yet. I don't know if doing an MLS would increase the number of people looking at it. Mary, I would disagree. I would let anyone use it wherever they wanted to, as long as it was historical.
Legal.
As long as it was, legal, thank you, and historical purpose. I do think, I'd like to be, if I'm optimistic, we'll get a bid from the MLS, as property. I would like it for us to consider what happens if we do not. At that point, then I think we should be able to go back and let the same group be part of the RFP process so they can be considered. I wouldn't want to close the door to all applicants, because it may be that the $1 would look good at that point. Because as Julie says, it's costing us money, and I'm not real happy. None of us, I can speak for us all in this case, is none of us are excited about spending $50,000 for a building if we don't think we're going to take care of it.
Can we ask a question of Joe?
Actually, let me go to Don, and then we'll ask the
Sorry.
question.
I'll defer.
Okay, go ahead.
I just was curious because to Mary's point about the housing and putting the historical restriction in, and to your point about maybe not putting too many restrictions, and I get that. So my question is, could you include the historical restriction in the RFP, and then, rather than pin it to housing, more of a preference that the board had a priority for or something, so that kind of doesn't restrict it to housing, but does let the board weigh in, or is that too generic and
So I think
unclear?
there's well, let me cut to the chase and say, we need a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about a historic restriction, are you talking about a restriction that would go on the deed that's recorded that says, there must always be an historic facade on the property or on the building. That's something you want to work with an attorney on, and you would not only have that in the RFP, but that you would also notify in the RFP that it's a criterion, and it's highly advantageous, or it's not advantageous, or disqualifying if you don't do it. But there's several different ways that you can put restrictions on it, and you need to know if you're talking about deed restrictions that could carry on with the property, or if you're talking about criteria within the RFP. And then last but not least, we can try MLS, but we don't know yet if it's allowed. There may be a reason why municipalities don't list surplus properties on MLS, and rather they do it on auction sites. But that is something that we'd have to vet with the Inspector General's office. We are required, however, on an RFP to list it in the two places that the state has, the Central Register and the State Bulletin. So those are all things that we can explore, and I can certainly come back to the board. But what the board needs is to give clear instruction on your expectations of value. What is value? Is it a dollar amount? Is it the reuse of the building? Is it an historic look in a district of critical concern? And so on and so forth. So whatever you decide helps write the RFP, helps inform the public and the bidders.
Thank you.
Mary?
I just wanted to follow up on that, Joe. Rather than a restriction, that just sounds, you know, you said you'd need lawyers, and that sounds like it would make, can it just be that preference would be given to, and then that gives us some leeway?
If it's allowed, I believe the language would be, because in an RFP, you're talking about not advantageous, advantageous, highly advantageous.
Okay.
And so we do have bandwidth, if you will, under the IG's regulations to write those things that are important to us in that manner. So that it would be that a certain facade could be construed as a highly advantageous response. And then you could add a whole bunch of other criteria to that, meaning the bidders have to have experience in such a project. Or if you have, 0 to 3, it's not advantageous, 3 to 5 years with a similar. So there's any number of ways you can proceed on down that path. And then the question of is it legal, we could share the RFP overall with the Inspector General's office and say, this is what we're contemplating. And before we release it, do you see any issues with it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back again to South Harwich Meeting House, because that's the only real example that I can play this off of. I didn't understand the severity of the financial obligation by putting the U.S. Secretary of Interior standards of preservation of historical structures, because that wasn't just the exterior. That's the whole building. Everything that gets done has to be done to a spec level, which is super expensive. And by the way, I didn't say that it needs someone to love it because I don't believe there is anybody. I've been enjoining people for several years to step forward and do what Judy Ford did in the other building and give this building some love. So I get what you're saying, but now's that time. Again, the DCPC ends at the front of the parking lot of that building. If we just restrict this for the conveyance purposes in the RFP, there is nothing, I mean nothing, stopping somebody when they buy it down the road a year or two, leveling it or doing whatever the hell they want to with it, because it's not part of the DCPC area. It doesn't have that protection. Unless it's deed protected, that's what you're after. You put a deed covenant in, and it restricts either the interior or exterior, or the exterior and the interior. We're going to wind up with nothing in the end, except for a bag of money. And I am positive that's not what town meeting wanted to do. And if I'm wrong, if everybody thinks I'm wrong, bring it in front of town meeting again, because I am positive that's not going to be the response. Just get rid of the darn thing and save the insurance money, and we don't care what happens to it. I don't believe that that's what town meeting wanted.
I think that if we put a preference of a historical facade restriction on it, when the RFP, when they come back in, we can rate them based on if somebody bids $75,000 that's willing to put deed restrictions on it, and somebody that's willing to restore the entire building, that would be highly advantageous based on public comment.
The deed restriction is the important part, though. Without that,
So-
nothing else
Right,
matters.
but we could put that, we could basically, we can use that as our grading system, but, you know, I agree that we need to move on with this. We have been talking about this building, and it's been empty for 30 years. It's deteriorating fast. We're not spending $50,000 on it. The quotes to fix the patch in the roof are much less than that. So hopefully, the paper doesn't say we're gonna spend $50,000 on that. But we are, it's time to move on, and we certainly will have another opportunity at this when we grade the RFP respondents on, and maybe at that point, by the time this gets done, the group that Duncan spoke about would purchase the building, and it would be a highly advantageous a bid, because it would be a historic renovation inside and out. Unlike Don, I don't believe that town meeting ever said, the historic facade was important, and I will admit that. The interior of that building, for anyone that's been in it over the last 35 to 40 years, it's not what it was built, and it's been haunted houses, and walls have been taken out of there, and the holes have been cut in, and it is not the same building. So to put another RFP out, to require somebody to do historic preservation inside too is a waste of our time, a waste of this conversation, and we are only gonna get one more bid, so we should just skip over the whole process. Joe?
There is no standard, federal, state, county, or local, that mandates the interior of buildings. The Secretary of the Interior Standards is built around the National Historic Register of Places. So if it was deemed to be an historic place, then you have to do the paint, the wood, and everything to the exterior. That is not deemed to be an interior historic building, so that would not be the case.
So I would look for a motion or at least I would support a real estate transaction on the building with a preference for historical restriction on the facade.
So moved.
Well, I'm gonna have you make the motion, I don't want to, but I'm gonna have Don had his hand up before we did that. And
What I would urge is, because this is starting to become Keystone Coppish, the way we're approaching this, draft something, have us look at it, and then we can approve it, because if you move to actually go out and we don't see this.
We're making a motion to tell our procurement officer to draft an RFP that we
Come
will
back to
then
us.
review and then approve.
Okay with
So we're not gonna just blindly say,
Okay.
go put something in the.
And it has to have a historic restriction to it, so whatever motion gets made.
Okay. I trust you'll help me.
Preference.
Well, let me say one more thing, because this goes back 30 years. When I was on that West Harwich School Building Committee in 1995, 6, 7, we got a town meeting vote for $50,000 to move it. And if a certain selectman hadn't been duplicitous and put that on, rather as opposed to a debt exclusion, which would go away as soon as it got moved, and got paid off. This was done as a flat-out override. It failed at the ballot box because it was going to add $50,000 to the town's levy capacity, and then 2.5% forever when you're only moving the building once. But the town meeting voted overwhelmingly to move, to spend 50 grand to move it and plunk it down as part of a Three Sisters arrangement in the hollow behind Brooks Academy. The town meeting has consistently, we went out and bought historic glass for it, which I thought was somewhat foolhardy, because I do know that the history of the building was BB guns going through windows, and that's why there were cages and wired glass. But the bottom line is this has been going on for a long time, and the town has actually taken actions to try to do something to preserve it. There was no inclination to just tear it down or just let somebody buy it and do whatever the heck they wanted.
And I personally don't think that that's where we're at right now, but it is time to move on from this property. It's been talked about for a long time. Mary?
I move that we vote to direct Joe to prepare a request for proposal for 5 Bell's Neck Road that includes a restriction for historical preservation of the exterior.
Second.
Okay, moved in second. The only comment in addition that I would, Joe, do you need the motion to include a rough value, or can we agree that it would be the land value? I'm not willing to pay
Any
for
statement
another-
like that is helpful. You know, what I'd be looking for tonight is potentially a list. So I heard restriction, on historic,
Exterior historic
on
preservation.
exterior historic preservation.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking as we go through this, because I'm trying to learn from our mistakes here. If we got a minimum, and we're going to hold somebody to a minimum, I'm not sure why we wouldn't state. I mean, Combis generally asks you to put a value on things when you go onto that system. You know what the procurement's worth. I would urge us, if that's where we're going, is if we got a hard and fast minimum bid, to state that in the RFP.
State the value, Joe.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
Because then you know what your target is. I mean, otherwise we may be just doing this again like Groundhog Day.
Which is what you had mentioned earlier, giving an idea of value, right?
So, yes, how does the town want to derive that value?
And I'm fine with land value,
So you're saying assessor's card.
yes.
I don't have a problem with that.
The
but I
land
don't know
value
how
part
everybody
of the
else-
assessor's card?
No, just the land
The
value,
land value on the assessor's card.
Can we include that in my motion?
yes.
With the value of,
Absolutely, I'd love a motion that has a list.
Yeah, okay, so
It'll check it twice.
the assessed value, was that in your motion, Mary?
it was
Is
in
that
my
your
motion
second?
very
Yes, it
clearly.
You're
was.
good with that in your second? Is the board okay with that? Anything else?
Value equal to, or derived from the assessed value of the property.
Land,
Is that?
Land.
The assessed value of the land, thank you.
Don?
And I'm just reading off of my cliff notes from when I was a procurement officer myself. Is there any value of doing this with a pre-bid conference too? Just so that everybody's on the same page? Nobody's hearing anything different from anybody. They're walking through the building differently, or can we agree to do that so that there's some basis for potential bidders?
We can, not to be pedantic, it would be an RFP, not a bid. So
Okay, but-
bid means we have no criteria, RFP means we're building it. We can do site visits. We would mandate that any questions received at any time be answered and shared with everybody, et cetera, et cetera.
That's what I'm looking for.
By the way, we would have done that had other bidders been involved in this process before as well.
That's part of your
That's
process.
the standard part of the process, correct.
Moved in second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. You're an aye, Larry? or-
I'm an aye. I'm still trying to understand it all.
Me too.
And Don,
We'll
you're an-
compare notes.
Don, you're an aye? Okay, 5-0, and that's, he's putting together an RFP.
An RFP, a
that we
draft,
will
we can
review.
review, yeah. My only,
It'll come
well,
back.
I'll come back and I'll try to understand.
It'll
it
come
more.
back, you'll see it.
Okay, moving on. Discussion and possible vote on the request for proposal for Cranberry Valley and Snack Shack at Saquatucket with an update from staff. Joe?
I believe the update is we've received the, what I would refer to as the boilerplate describing the properties and some marketing type statements from staff. So now we'd be incorporating that into a draft RFP and can certainly mirror the process we just talked about, bring it back to the board. And I can see that happening, say, within the month, just based on everything we have coming up.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just out of curiosity, Joe, is this going to be written so that it could be evaluated to a most advantageous position, so that it could either be an aggregate bid or separates, depending on what's more advantageous?
Yeah, the intent is to distribute it as one packet, talking about both properties, but the town is seeking any bids related to one, the other,
Or
both.
both,
Or
okay.
anything
Okay,
like
great.
that. And as with the other ones, there'll be language throughout that continues to reserve the rights of the town. So
Yeah,
that
I'm
you'd have
just,
the right to
I'm just
say.
interested because I've done aggregate bids before that split them out, and whether you could award one to one company and one to another if that was in
So
your best
again,
interest.
that's bid different than RFP. We could explore that if you want, though. You know, the main difference between, if I could real quick, is, first of all, value is necessary because it determines whether we have to do an RFP or an invitation for bid. If there's a choice, the standard practice is you want to always choose the RFP because the town can develop the criteria for decision-making, and it's not just high bid, low bid, or things like that. If it requires, if it allows for a bid, the board may want to consider that we do bids, because in the example before, the bid would simply be, this is what we're offering for sale, and the highest bid wins. So if there had been a bid, if we had done that as a bid, and again, I'll still have to check and see whether that's possible based on the perceived value. But if there had been a bid of, say, $2,000 and no other bids, the town could say that's the high bid. The town, throughout any of those procedures, always reserves the right to say, we're not gonna do anything. You can back out of it for no reason.
Done.
But you may want to consider RFP versus IFB.
Versus what?
IFB,
Invitation for
invitation
bids.
for bid.
Okay.
Without going further than knee-deep into the grass and the weeds right now, I don't care about I agree with you about the RFP. I just wanted to make the point that don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, that we have the ability to take a separate entity for each of the places or the same entity for both places.
Absolutely.
I mean,
The
so
intent here is for the town to derive the best benefit that the town sees it as.
that makes sense.
Larry?
I'm okay now. I just want to be very sure that we'll consider separate bids in addition to the combined bids, because I don't want to lock anyone out of the snack shack.
Correct.
For instance, who may have no interest in the cranberry.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's not going to be considered disadvantageous to do one or the other.
Right, good.
Julie?
No, I agree with that. I think that's important. I mean, you want to have as many people who can bid on it as possible. So.
Mary?
I'm also,
I am all set. Thank you, Joe. Discussion and possible vote to convey the deeded land located at map 40 parcel Z5-265 Sisson Road to the Affordable Housing Trust. We took this one off last week. We were waiting for an opinion from legal and Joe.
So short answer is I've received a response from legal. However, I have to sit with Katie and figure out what it actually means for the town going forward. It may be possible to bring it up on the 13th. And I also want to just let you know that both parties fully executed the other documents. They're being shipped overnight at the direction of council, and council will let us know as soon as they're conveyed and recorded. So those ones should be done this week.
Thank you.
great.
Town administrators report.
So, beyond what you have in the packet, what I'd like to say, if I could, is, and it's the way the meeting started out earlier, where Cindy was talking about just a wonderful weekend in Harwich, and that is to say that despite the fact that you folks chose me to be the town administrator, years before I chose Harwich to be my home. And this past weekend is the kind of weekend that makes me very, very glad that I did. It's just a wonderful place that has wonderful activities. And I know towns do it, but Harwich does it better, I'm not gonna lie. Seeing the little kids in front of that tree singing, walking through the port on a beautiful night, seeing the kids over the weekend go to see Santa and the Polar Express. It's a great weekend, it gets me energized, and it's one of the many things I love about our town. So kudos to everybody that made it happen, and I'm a sucker for Harwich.
Thank you. Selectmen's report, Don?
I was there, and despite that, Joe had a good time. Yeah, he's right. This is our own little, Rockefeller Center ain't got nothing on us. This is really a warm and caring community, and you can tell when we have events like this. And not to disparage any of our neighbors, but my kids have mentioned that. It was like, wow, Harwich has really become the go-to place over the last 5 or 10 years. And you can feel why. It's not just for going drinking at night. I mean, it was just wonderful.
Great. Thank you. Mary?
All set.
Julie?
I don't know.
Larry?
I agree with those statements, and the only thing that shocked me was when the siren went off with the fire truck. I will comment that I talked to my daughter in Westford. They had a similar event. Fire truck. It also shocked everyone. It was great to see Santa Claus come out. It was a great event. Thank you, Cindy. And,
Can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
5-0.